Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Serdar Korucu. He is a journalist and author who is here in Yerevan from Istanbul. Serdar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As I mentioned in the opening, you are a journalist and an author, and you wrote a book with Aris Nalci of İmece TV in Istanbul called 1915, 50 years before 2015 and 50 years after 1915. It's a very interesting book because 1965 was really a critical moment, I think, in the history of the Armenian nation, because it was a real awakening. Here in Soviet Armenia and in the diaspora, Armenian communities became more politicized and they began demanding recognition for the first genocide of the 20th century. Interestingly, in Soviet Armenia in those days, they were also demanding their lands back, which is really quite astounding, taking into consideration the regime under which they were living at the time. What was the motivation for this book now?
Because everybody in Turkey talks about Armenian Genocide's anniversary next
the centennial,
year.
right?
Yeah. And now everybody has a question marks about genocide's anniversary. What will happen in Turkey, in Europe, and also in US? Maybe US recognize or not, and everybody thinks about a lot of things. And we want to say, come on, this is just anniversary. Yeah, this is important, but in 1965, there is a first anniversary, which is first awakeness. And we want to say, look up. First, you can look to past, what will happen in 2015.
So by that, you're saying that nothing much is going to happen in 2015, in your opinion?
Actually, it's not a big deal. Yeah, it's symbolically, yes, important, but I don't believe in Turkey's step forward or US recognized or something happened. I don't think so. Yeah, it's symbolically so important, but politically, it's just a year, I think.
Like any other year that we would commemorate the genocide.
Yeah,
but a lot of importance has been given to the centennial from the Armenians, from Turkey, from Turks, from different circles in Turkey. So you think there's no expectation? On April 23, at the time, Prime Minister Erdogan issued a letter, an open letter to the Armenians. Some in Turkey, I was there at the time, I was there in Turkey when he issued that letter, and many Turks and some Armenians were cautiously optimistic, saying that this is the first time that a prime minister, a leading figure of the Republic of Turkey has actually talked about those events publicly. Is that not a symbol of what might come?
Actually, they are optimistic because Turkish Republic's first letter about this issue. So maybe they have a little right about it, because in first time in Turkish Republic, yeah, there's a first statement. Maybe this is right, but in this book, for example, you can see another optimistic people in Turkey, in Armenian society also. For example, in 1965, in First Awakeness, some part of Armenians in Turkey says, oh, come on, there isn't, yeah, we had bad times in Turkey, once upon a time, it's just passed over, and we are citizens of Turkish Republic, and we have no problem with this state, and just forget it, yeah, there isn't big and bad massacres, but this is not only one way, this is two ways, so we can get over it, they say. So it's similar, I think. Some parts of society is always some optimistic, but actually not only optimistic.
Is it because, do you think that, maybe this is a very sort of primitive question, is it because Turkish society is not ready for it? Do you think if Turkish society had been ready for it, the leadership would have perhaps thought about taking steps to end this 100-year-old stalemate that we have?
Actually, I think maybe I'm not optimistic, but Turkish people never can be ready for it, because this is a huge crime. It is a huge humanity crime, and they can't say, yes, we did it and we are so sorry. It's so fragile and it's so big guilty, and I don't know how can they commit it, how can they admit it, because, for example, Germans admit genocide because they their cities all captured, and then international laws came Germany, and then they forced to.
So is it going to be a moment where Turkey will be forced to do it?
Actually, there is no power to force Turkey to admit Armenian genocide, because Turkish Republic, if you see the history of Turkish Republic, it's based by Armenian genocide. For example, if you go to Malatya or Antep, or this is Western Armenian cities, you can see government buildings are all old Armenian buildings. So how can they say this to their people? How can say, okay, we have a big crime and we get Holocaust to Armenian people? How can they say?
But what's the answer, Serdar? Where do we go? How do we continue living side by side with closed borders, with no diplomatic relations, with this eternal, I don't know, this horrible event, this crime hanging over the heads of both peoples?
Actually, I don't know, because this is a huge problem, and one part, I think, Armenians feels, how can I say, this is so big, lost.
Sure.
They lost.
It's a personal and it's a
things.
collective loss.
Yeah. And I can understand how they feel, because they lost their parents, they lost their lands, and they lost their cultures and big culture. And I can't imagine actually how can they feel. Okay, I understood this, but I understood also Turks, because a lot of them. Governments say to them, there is no genocide, this is imperialist lie, and we have some wars in the First World War, and we war with them,
sure.
And they believe in it. But now some Turks and Kurds may be enlightened, but it's not enough for them. I think only solution dialogue, but dialogue with societies, because governments can't do anything, because they have only they think only money, or they think only politics and blah blah. Only society can change.
I'm going to ask you a very provocative question, and you can choose to answer it or not. As a citizen of Turkey, as a Turk, as somebody who obviously has studied the Armenian Genocide, as a journalist who writes about it, you also write articles for Agos and other papers, I presume. What are you willing to give up if Turkey was to acknowledge the Armenian Genocide? As a citizen of Turkey, what are you willing? Are you willing to give up money, lands? Is it acknowledgement? Do you know what I'm saying? Do you know? I mean, these are questions that we don't ask one another. We don't oftentimes. We have this internal discussion as Armenians of what it is that we want. One Armenian will say, the recognition is good enough for me. One Armenian will say, no, I want the Treaty of Sevres borders.
Everybody can say everything.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, there's something to give up. There's something to give up. What are you willing?
For example, for me, just for me.
Sure.
Just for me. I think always recognition is not enough for me. Because they lost everything. They lost lands, they lost histories and cultures and blah,
sure.
blah, a lot of things. Money is not enough also. what can you say? If I kill your father and mother, and if I
pay it's
for
okay.
it, you can't. It's not enough for. But how can it be? I don't know. For example, Germany and Israel. Yeah, they recognized the genocide. Yeah, they pay for it. But again, Jewish people never forget. Never forget this. And maybe they forgive because young Germans have no guilty about
Sure.
it. Yeah, they understood what happens. Maybe they forgive. Maybe in Turkey also, if they recognize, and maybe in dialogues, I don't know what will happen, land or money or blah blah. I think this is fragile.
It is. That's why I said it's a very
Yeah,
provocative question. I don't expect you to have a solution. I think that this is part of that dialogue you were talking about.
For example, I want Western Armenian people in their homes. I want to see this, for example. I want to see one day, I hope, in Malatya, there lives in there will live in Armenian
the descendants
people
to return back to their roots.
Yeah. I want to see this, but how can it be? I don't know, but I hope one day it will be.
Well, Serdar, I really thank you for being very honest and I would say very courageous, because I know how difficult it is to be so forthright in your country, in a region that oftentimes doesn't want to hear the truth or personal opinions. So thank you for the book. Thank you for being our guest. I hope we continue our conversations so that we become better acquainted with one another and with what we expect from each other as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was Serdar Korucu. He is a journalist and writer from Istanbul. Stay with CivilNet.